Welcome back. Remember this picture? We have shown this before. We looked at this picture way back when, and we said that one of the three critical pieces of responsibilities of a product manager is to make the product ready and manage it so that it is ready for the customer. So that means pretty much all the things that you need to manage the product development from a non-engineering point of view, you are responsible for it. And more important in this is deliver in time. And to manage, that means to manage this product development such that you are meeting the customer schedule expectation is what is important in this. And so by now you know that being a product manager is a skill, that is a conflict management skill, that is a trade-off skill, that is a decision management skill, and nothing is more important. Nothing tests or applies your trade-off skills and different conflict management skills, not between people but between different requirements and resources and so forth, as the requirements management. Product requirements management is a real nuts and bolts of what it means to be a product manager. And so the first rule you have to remember as a product manager when you're doing this product requirements is you are never going to get all your product requirements into that product. And why is that? Because every requirement comes with a time factor attached to it. Obviously, you know what I'm talking about. Every requirement that you spell it out requires time to be implemented by the development team, right? And so I'm showing you a graphic here. So as you add up all these time factors, you know that the reality of the company is you have a limited number of developers, and as a consequence, you have a limited development time. And you don't have the liberty of changing the deadline. And even if you don't have a specific customer, if you're a startup, for example, and if your marketing sales team decides, or if your management decides that you're going to announce the product, or let some customers know that you have this product at a trade show, at a demo show, then that date is your date. That is your cutoff date. And so the point being that the constraints are already there, limited resources, limited time, and your schedule and deadline expected date is set that you can't move. And so the only things that are fluid in the sense are product requirements and the people who work in it, but that's not really too much flexible. Company suddenly can't hire more people, maybe a few consultants or a few people, but not exactly. So as a product manager, you need to be aware of the fact that product requirements is a trade-off skill when you work with the engineering folks. And so normally when a product manager puts together such requirements, what this means is you should spell out the priority, which requirement is more important than the other. Typically, this is very common sense. This is nothing new, and pretty much any person who has done project management will know that any task or any feature, all of these will have priority attached to it, and this process works. And typically, in any product management, product requirement set of document, you will have three priorities. It's a must-have, or it should have, or it's nice to have. Must-have is exactly what it says. It must have, and it should have means that requirements. Well, you should really put it there. But if hell freezes over, so to speak, then maybe you can drop it. Nice to have is once the must have and should haves are done, are being put into the product, if you still have time and if you can find a way to put it there, nice to have is nice to have. You can put those requirements. So that's the rationale or the thinking behind it. And requirements management is a big topic, and I don't want to spend too much time in talking about how you manage requirements. That's not really the focus of this lecture series. But as a beginning product manager, how do you want to think about requirements? Especially if you don't think about these requirements in a proper manner, you're going to develop some bad habits. In the sense that requirements are a key way you're going to interact with the engineering folks and operations and everybody else in the company. And you want to make sure that you approach it in a very thorough, professional way that is devoid. That you take, although passion is there, but you want to take your personal opinions and desirabilities out of it, but then put the feasibility and what's possible, what's the right thing to do, and what's the right feature to do, put it in. So those are the approaches that I want to be talking about. I want to talk about in the next few minutes in this lecture. I'm going to first talk about a set of key points, as if you've never done any product requirements and it's very new to any product requirements exercise. Very basic blocking and tackling type of issues, and then talk about a few guidelines that might help you get started in thinking the right way about the requirements management. And so the very first point you want to remember is, as a product manager, you are the one who will be creating this requirements document. You will be managing this requirements document. No one else will do it. No one gives you, here's the preliminary cut and then you go manage it. That's not like that. If you are being asked to put together a set of requirements, you are going to put together, start from a blank sheet of paper. Most typically you will have some sort of a template in your company that a previous product manager has used or the company has adopted. So you'll use that template. And then this product requirements document is a very, very sensitive, internal only confidential document, and only you, management team, engineering team will have exposure to it, and not even salespeople will get to see it. So understand that there is this sensitivity attached to the requirements document. And the second is, because you are writing this document, you need to know who your target audience is. Well, target readers and audience for this document are developers, fellow marketing and product managers, and anyone who you think are important in helping to develop the requirements and develop the product. So those are the target audience. So you want to be very clear in how you write the requirements. The simplicity and at the same time succinctly you capture in specific ways these requirements are where your skills will come through, and you want to apply those skills. And the third point is that this requirements document is always a living document. You're never going to prepare some and then shut it and then that's it. You're not going to touch it. That's not going to be like that. You're always going to change it based on what you're listening from both the engineers and the marketer, fellow marketers and the market and customers. Pretty much everything else that goes around this product development, you are going to keep a record of it in this requirements document as far as they are requirements. And it is your job, you as a product manager, it is your job to keep it updated. So anybody, anytime, say engineering manager, a developer, or whoever asks you for a copy of the requirements document, they expect that is the latest document. So it's up to you. You need to maintain it. And the other point you want to talk about is, just because you put the requirement in this document does not mean that your product will have that requirement. And so these two are different things. And I think you know what I'm talking about, and that is you need to put the requirement in place, but if it doesn't make the cut, it won't go into this version of the product. That's pretty much what I mean. And conversely, and this is very important, if you do not put a requirement in the requirements document, then engineering is not going to discuss with you about it, and you should not even expect that it will go into the product. Obviously, if you what that means is, if you are serious about a certain requirement, don't expect that somebody will pick it up from your email chain and then put it in the product. No, as long as it is not in the product requirements, no one's going to really care about it. This is by design. It has to be that way because the process works through this requirements document. So be aware of this process. It's very, very methodical, and it means what it says. It is a requirements document. And so those are some of the key basic points. And as far as the guidelines, I want to show you a few guidelines that will help you to set yourself in the right direction. Number one is always show in your requirements documents, 2 or 3 application or an end user use case scenarios to explain how the product is being used by your customer by a non-developer. And this is a guideline. This is something that is a good practice, because your engineering team, your development team has to know, and it is your job to communicate that. They have to know how their product will be used by the end user. Now, end user means a non-developer. So an end user, the assumption there is that they should not expect anything about what is under the hood of the product. And so this is very important, that you have a layman's perspective of how the product is used. So you should document that ahead of any other section in the requirements document. And then second guideline is that always try to be very specific about each requirement. I'll give you an example. Don't say that, okay, requirement number 122, product should be easy to use. Well, that's not a requirement. Well, at least that's your intention, but that's not a requirement that an engineering team can do something specific with it. What you want to do is, okay, your goal is to make your product easy to use. So why don't you describe in a set of sub requirements, let's say something like, 3 button clicks are maximum users should be using, or 3 touch tabs to go from this to another, this state to another state, or from beginning to the end. And so you want to describe in a very specific that engineers can go implement. And so that's a good practice. So requirements are different from desires, different from intentions, and different from what the features are. Again, you can't just describe the feature. A feature is really something that goes into a product brochure. And how you implement that feature is broken down into a specific set of sub-requirements and steps, and that goes into the requirements document. Obviously, that gets translated into technical specification in the technical spec document that the engineering team owns. And so there is that transition. You go from a very high level user understands that feature to specific sub-requirements that make up into this feature, that those sub-requirements go into requirements document, and then engineering spec document goes into more technical implementation detail. And so that's the way you want to think about the specificity of the requirement. And another guideline is this, that you should always approach every requirement with realistic priorities. In other words, don't load every requirement with a must-have a priority. Obviously, that's not going to, and that looks nice on the product requirements document, and you feel better for a moment that, okay, you've insisted in getting all these product requirements as a must-have, but they're not really feasible if you put it that way. Desire and intention is one thing, but feasibility and the right way to do it in the way that engineering can actually develop it and enjoy the whole task while doing it. I'm not saying you should not create a sense of urgency, but there is always this this balance of what you want to do in terms of what you want to achieve. Be smart is what I'm saying. And another thing is, anytime you put a requirements, you should always be ready to justify that requirement, either by having a backup data such as here is the customer request, and here is the discussion with the customer, and it's evident from this discussion that the customer considers this to be an important requirement, or company has decided to go in this strategic direction and that calls for the product to have XYZ features or XYZ requirements. And so this argument is what you need to develop in a sound, realistic sense that makes the engineering development team believe that, okay, what you're saying makes sense. And lastly, I want to highlight one point, that an ill-defined requirement is actually going to cost you a lot more. I can imagine a situation where a beginning product manager trying to put together these requirements may leave some of the requirements not clearly defined, and as you discuss with the engineering during various sessions, it is normal to sort of defer these not clearly defined requirements to a future date, and you as a product manager will come away with the feeling that, okay, well, I've discussed it with the engineering and I just need to elaborate it and they're going to put it in there if we agreed that it's going to go in. But then when you do come back and try to add more specific detail, you may realize that engineering need to sort of unwind some of the development that they have already done to accommodate, because now they know more about the specifics and it's not exactly what they thought when they just read your top level description. And so the lesson here is that you want to make sure you define them upfront very clearly, because all of these requirements are going to translate themselves into the scope for the engineering implementation, and the engineering manager obviously is very sensitive to how much time is spent because they have the deadline to catch up with. And so that's something that you want to be careful about. And so in general, you now have two critical pieces of information. One is you have the customer schedule in your hand or the deadline for the project, and on the other hand, now you have a set of requirements for the product. These two critical pieces are going to be driving factors in establishing the development plan. And so in the next lecture, let's talk about that development plan. Okay, I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you.